Donald Trump has always been a fan of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, but at the White House this week, this defense of his ally shocked even his supporters.
He's done a phenomenal job. You're mentioning somebody that was extremely controversial. A lot of people didn't like that gentleman that you're talking about. Whether you like him or didn't like him, things happen. But he knew nothing about it, and we can leave it at that. You don't have to embarrass our guest by asking a question like that.
Now, as a reminder, Jamal Khashoggi was the US-based columnist at The Washington Post who was chopped up by Saudi agents for criticizing Mohammed bin Salman. These were the infamous images of Khashoggi entering the Saudi embassy in Turkey in 2018, where he hoped to collect a divorce certificate. He would never leave that building. This was a huge global story at the time. You'll remember it, but for 2 weeks, the Saudi government denied any knowledge of Khashoggi's fate. Bin Salman even told Bloomberg News that Khashoggi had left the embassy after a few minutes. The Saudis, though, later changed their tune. So as Turkish officials continued to search for the journalist's body, Saudi Arabia said that Khashoggi had been killed during a fight in the consulate after staff attempted to kidnap him. That story changed again days later, with the country admitting the killing was premeditated. And it wasn't long before the CIA concluded that Saudi Crown Prince bin Salman had ordered Khashoggi's assassination. Khashoggi's body was never found, but the Washington Post later pieced together what might have become of it through an audio recording of Khashoggi's last moments in the consulate.
This is a team of operatives from Saudi Arabia that come with a syringe loaded with enough sedative to be lethal. There's a struggle. He maybe tries to resist, and you hear him struggling, trying to hold on to life, hold on to breath, and then that struggle ends. So what happens next in the consulate is it just goes quiet, and it sounds like there is some regrouping going on among this team. The commotion starts again. Then there is a sound of some sort of electronic device, a saw, something. Something is happening that suggests that they are trying to find a way to dispose of Jamal's body. There is this excruciating noise. It's unclear what happens next. It's what happens to Jamal's body is one of the lingering mysteries here.
Barry, I mean, we knew that Donald Trump didn't have much respect for the free press, but this was a Washington Post columnist who was, we think, chopped up and carried out in suitcases from the Saudi embassy. The CIA said that MBS ordered it. Basically, everyone believes MBS ordered it. Trump, when he's asked about it, not only says, let's not talk about this because this is diplomacy, he basically smears Khashoggi, says he's a very controversial guy, like basically he asked for it. And MBS definitely didn't know. It's quite low even for Donald Trump.
It's really low even for him. I completely agree. And look, Donald Trump says the quiet part out loud. We know this about him. And sometimes that's kind of refreshing. Even changing the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War. Great. That really does describe the US Department of Defense more accurately. And I remember in 2018 when Jamal Khashoggi was killed in, as you say, this incredibly brutal fashion, attacked within moments of walking through the door of the embassy. Trump sort of said, look, we're not going to do anything about it because, Saudi is worth so much money to us. I think he said something like, we're not going to give up $450 billion, which was just another one of those figures that he pulls from the air. But, the sentiment was there. The sentiment was, we're not going to do anything because Saudi is a very close ally. And that is also the case. That would also have been the case under any other president. They just wouldn't have said it out loud. So there is, that realpolitik element to him. But this went so much further than that. He didn't just say, look, MBS didn't know about it, which flies in the face of what the CIA have said, which would be, one thing, but not necessarily surprising. What he did was he justified the execution of a journalist. And, Jamal Khashoggi was not some sort of opposition activist or dissident who masqueraded as a journalist. He'd been the editor-in-chief of Al Madina, which is a very significant newspaper in Saudi. He'd worked as the editor of, I think, Al Watan. He'd worked for Arab News. He'd been a foreign correspondent for one of those newspapers, I think Al Watan, where he'd worked in kind of Afghanistan and Sudan and other places. This was a real journalist who had gone into exile in the US and become quite critical of the Saudi government. And that is why he was killed. And the reporting is all there, not just from the CIA. MBS did indeed order his death. And so to see these two world leaders sitting there and Donald Trump justifying this by saying he was a controversial figure, but also a lot of people didn't like him, therefore he deserved to be chopped up with a bone saw. I really feel like we're entering some kind of a new era of impunity, where we've kind of never seen world leaders speak this way. And, again, when I talk about realpolitik, I'm sure that there are people in the US State Department or people in the CIA that would have been their attitude privately would have been, what he said, things happen, that is not going to change the nature of our relationship with Saudi Arabia. But I don't think that those people would have gone so far as to even think, well, he had it coming, which is basically what Donald Trump said. So I think it was extraordinary what happened.
Immoral is an understatement, isn't it? Let's look at one of the topics that was discussed at that summit. It was whether the Saudis would join the Abraham Accords with Israel, of course. Let's take a look.
Have you reached an agreement on a U.S.-Saudi defense treaty today? And are you going to bring up the Abraham Accords in your discussion?
I already brought them up.
What did you say?
I think I got a positive response. Would you like to respond?
Yeah, so
put you on the spot.
so definitely we believe having a good relation with all Middle Eastern countries is a good thing, and we want to be part of the Ibrahim Accord, but we want also to be sure that we secure a clear path of two-state solution. And today we have a healthy discussion with Mr. President that we're going to work on that to be sure that we can prepare the right situation as soon as possible to have that.
I think we're, I don't want to use the word commitment, but we've had a very good talk on the Abraham Accords. We talked about one state, two state. We talked about a lot of things in a short period of time. We'll be discussing it further, too. But I think you have a very good feeling toward the Abraham Accords.
Yes, definitely, Mr. President. We want peace for the Israelis. We want peace for the Palestinians. We want them to coexist peacefully in the region. And we will do our best to reach that day.
And the defense agreement, have you reached agreement on that?
We pretty much have.
Quick question for the Crown Prince, if I could just finish.
We have reached agreement on that.
Okay.
So we talked about one state, two state. Now the one state, two state conversation on the left is generally, should it be a secular state with one person, one vote, where it's not a religious state in any way, or should there be two states where you have a Jewish state and then a Palestinian state? I assume when they talked about one state, two state, it was either the whole thing being Israel with apartheid, or there being an Israel and a Palestine. Barry, the position from the Saudis is that they're interested in signing up to the Abraham Accords if there is some kind of roadmap in place for a two-state solution. How seriously should we take that?
I'm not buying it. I'm not buying that the Saudis are going to sign up to the Abraham Accords anytime soon. I think Mohammed bin Salman played that question off in the Oval Office quite cleverly. When he says that they want a roadmap to a two-state solution, I think they want something more than some kind of a Trump promise. And I think they're sort of kicking the can down the road a little bit. It is still politically quite difficult for the Saudis to sign up to the Abraham Accords, I think. Who's signed up to it so far? I think the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, and then we had Egypt and Jordan already had normalized relationships with Israel. The two big countries who I think Trump really wants to get signed up are Syria and Saudi Arabia. I think a couple of weeks ago, they had kind of trailed that they had one new big country and people thought, wow, could it be Syria? Could it be Saudi? And it turned out to be Kazakhstan. So, no shade on Kazakhstan, but not exactly the headline Trump was looking for. The Saudis want things from the US, right? They want that defense pact. They may want access to US sort of civilian nuclear technology. And the US wants many things from the Saudis. What Trump mostly wants is money. He wants to be able to trumpet investments. Trump wants to trumpet investments, but also we should remember that his family has massive investments in Saudi, and so I think he's speaking in public, trying to put a little bit of public pressure to show people that he's working on it. But I reckon that even behind the scenes, Trump knows that is not going to happen within the next 5 minutes. But I think that MBS is clever enough to dangle the possibility for some leverage with the US. But I will be very, very surprised if this happens quickly. Just two things in terms of the pressure I mentioned and the political kind of risk for the Saudis. Although the space for freedom of expression is still very, very slim in Saudi Arabia, Saudi society is very, very, very pro-Palestine. And I don't think that MBS wants to irritate the Saudi population in that way. And then also, if Saudi Arabia was to sign up to the Abraham Accords, then, its number one kind of regional foe, Iran, will be able to accuse it of betrayal. And Turkey would probably do the same thing. So I just don't see it happening anytime soon. I don't think it makes sense for the Saudis. And I don't think that the US has enough clout right now to bounce them into it.
Sort of a fairly different topic, but sort of Saudi related, just because it keeps appearing on my news feed. It's sort of like TikTok videos of people at like music festivals in Saudi Arabia with men and women and people not covered, and people sort of saying how much Saudi Arabia has changed under MBS. Now, obviously, he's not someone who cares about human rights. He's someone who who ordered the murder of a journalist. Sorry. Is Saudi Arabia liberalizing though? Sort of, if you were a Saudi person, is it a better place to live than it was before MBS came to power? What's your understanding of that?
I don't know. Sure, there has been a slight liberalization when it comes to the things that you're talking about. And we know that Saudi is trying to diversify its economy a little bit, right? And they're opening up to international investment. They want foreigners to come. They want foreigners to visit. We've also seen the sports washing, where they're moving into football. I'm a massive boxing fan, and they've essentially taken over the sport of boxing entirely. So I think that some of these moves are an attempt to attract foreign investment, to soften the image a little bit in order to do that. But the space for freedom of expression and the space for any criticism of the government is still not there at all. So yeah, maybe some social reforms, but reforms around human rights or freedom of expression or anything like that, no, not at all. And actually, I think that, what we've seen MBS is willing to do in order to shut down dissent does not indicate that, that the space for political expression is going to open up anytime soon.